waving dreams in our eyes. The crowds roar like a storm on the wind. We're the underdogs fighting again.
What's going on, guys, and welcome to Stateside Footy. It is Sunday evening, and to be honest with you, I'm not exactly the biggest fans of Sunday evenings because we all know what happens on Monday morning. We all go back to work, and yeah, not exactly the biggest fan of Sunday evenings. All right. Well, tonight we're going to have ourselves an interesting conversation because I like to consider this like maybe the third part of a two-part discussion that we've already had, regarding, I guess you can say it, what I consider the most ridiculous thing, which is, this MLS quota, this belief that, there is like this deep secret cabal within U.S. soccer. And tonight I wanted to have a conversation specifically about our head coach, Mauricio Pochettino, because, I don't think, people really understand that Mauricio Pochettino doesn't have any ties to U.S. soccer. Yes, he's the U.S. soccer head coach, and that's fantastic, and he's doing a job. But, when we really kind of dig deep into it, he's not really a U.S. soccer employee. And I think that's, I also think that's kind of interesting because, it goes against the narrative of what people, want to believe or what people choose to believe when it comes to U.S. soccer. Before we get into it, please do me a favor and hook your boy up by throwing me a little bit of a like and subscribe ski, a little subscribe skis, hook me up. Don't think about it. It's free. I hate when people say that it's free. Of course it's free, but if you like the conversation, hit the like and subscribe button and also hit the notification bell. I do want to send out some love to all those who are tuning in on TikTok Live. And I do want to send some love to those that are tuning in on X and Facebook and of course, YouTube as well too. All right, let's go ahead and get into the conversation because, a couple nights ago I had, Jeff Lageson on and, we went back through the different cycles. And the necessity of, Major League Soccer's ties with U.S. soccer. And of course, the nexus of Major League Soccer is because it's the ground floor of U.S. soccer. It is a professional league. And when it was first incepted, it was a place where some of our players could actually play in a club setting. For the most part, because a lot of those guys couldn't necessarily make the jump over to Europe. They had to play somewhere. They weren't good enough to play in Mexico. And so from that standpoint, they had to play somewhere. But that being said, as the cycles progressed, and as, as the U.S. residency program and the U system were kicking players up, a lot of those players either were signed by professional teams across the pond at a very young age, or excuse me, or they, matriculated into MLS as young players and were able to use the national team to buoy their careers overseas. And then as Major League Soccer continued to grow and the academies became a thing, U.S. Soccer decided the residency program wasn't really necessary anymore because of the academy system. And so Major League Soccer was doing the heavy lifting. But from the nexus of, of the reason why it is important that the national team embrace Major League Soccer is because it's their feeder system. And by the way, every single national team on the face of this planet relies on their top flight for their national team. Obviously, some leagues are far and away clear-cut better, but it still doesn't negate the fact that, that they rely on their top flight. The only countries that really don't are Canada, because the Canadian Premier League, is only like maybe still within its infancy. It's like 5 to 10 years old, and at this stage, that league is still growing. And you see Jamaica and you see Panama, where some of their best players are in Major League Soccer, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that their professional leagues are professional, I guess you can say, in the loose sense. There are exceptions, but for the most part, every major nation on the face of the earth relies on its top flight to be its feeder system into its national team. It's the way it's always been. But the interesting thing about our current head coach, and I think this is I think this ties into everything, is the fact that Mauricio Pochettino is here to do a job, and that's it. He's not a U.S. Soccer employee. Now, traditionally, i.e., say, what's his ass from the 80s? Jesus Christ, what's his name? God, I'm bad with names. There you go. Bob Gansler. There you go. Who was the head coach for the 1990 World Cup? Guys like Bob Gansler, guys like Bora Milutinovic, Steve Sampson, Bruce Arena, Bob Bradley, Jurgen Klinsmann, Greg Berhalter. Those guys were U.S. Soccer employees. And there was a clear definition because their salaries were paid by the federation. And the difference between Mauricio Pochettino and those guys is the fact that his salary is not being paid by the federation. As a matter of fact, his salaries is being paid by Ken Griffin and Scott Goodwin. These guys are billionaire hedge fund guys, and they are commercial and private donors to U.S. Soccer. These were the money guys behind the Atlanta Training Center. By and large, that's who is responsible. And the interesting thing about this is that not only is Mauricio Pochettino not a U.S. Soccer employee, not only is his salary not being paid by the federation, he's an outsider. He has absolutely no ties to U.S. Soccer whatsoever. He has no ties to the U.S. First Division, our top flight. And obviously that was made very aware when he actually took over. And I think this is kind of an interesting point because it actually runs counter to the narrative that, some of these rage baiters want us to believe that, he is just another tool or he's just another puppet being propped up by U.S. Soccer. And it's like, not even remotely close. He's Mauricio Pochettino. He's a guy who grinded out his entire career, whether it was a player coming up through the Argentinian system, making his way over as a player. And then when his playing career was done, on the behest of a guy like Marcelo Bielsa, who spotted him and said, "Hey, listen, you're the type of guy who would probably make a good coach." So, he was thinking about going back to school to get his degree, and then his life pivoted and he got his coaching badges. And then, of course, the rest is history, because he goes from Spain to Southampton, to Tottenham Hotspur, and then, of course, to PSG, to Chelsea, and now to the U.S. men's national team. He is a guy who has absolutely earned his stripes, and that at no point had he had any ties to the U.S. system. On a few occasions, he coached a couple players, at Spurs, but for the most part, he's a guy that, this is his first dance. This is his first rodeo with dealing with some of the upper echelons and the nepotism with inside U.S. soccer. And the idea that he would be saddled with players of a MLS quota. He's the type of guy who would quit right on the spot, because that's not how it works. You don't saddle a coach with players that he doesn't know, doesn't have, hasn't even seen, doesn't necessarily have the time. And oh, by the way, the dude lives in London, doesn't even live in the United States. His assistants are the ones that are doing the groundwork, laying the foundation, right? That's usually what assistants do anyways. But to me, I find it entertaining when I hear these type of things. Logan Ruckert says, "Jesus loves you, brother." Yeah, I'm sure he loves you too, man. But it's interesting. It's interesting when I hear these things, and the truth kind of stares you right in the fucking face. And yet there is a subset of people with opinions that will engage, knowing that it's complete bullshit, that doesn't pass the smell test, and yet we'll put it out there for engagement. And there are some that will drink it up. I get it. Major League Soccer is not the most popular soccer league in this in this country. I get it. There's plenty of things that I don't like about Major League Soccer. Plenty. And I've been over them, ad nauseum. But one of the things that I know is that Major League Soccer does not have that type of pull. And by the way, this narrative, by the way, is relatively new, because this was not a thing during Jurgen Klinsmann's tenure as U.S. coach. This was not a conversation topic during Bob Bradley's cycles, either both of Bruce Arena's cycles, or even back in the 1990s. I can guarantee you that this is relatively new. And it's relatively new because of the odd way that Greg Berhalter ran his international windows. And there had seemed to be a want and desire to choose domestic players over international players. And, when you have a federation that continues to step on its own dick and continues to have public embarrassments, and it shows a true lack of leadership, it opens the door for these type of conversations to enter. Because if you're shown to be incompetent, what else in what other areas is there going to be incompetence, right? I think a lot of people thought that the only reason why Greg Berhalter was hired in the first place was because his brother's an executive. So right off the jump, there is always going to be this question of nepotism. Understandable. Understandable. I didn't like the Berhalter hire from the jump, but I didn't for once didn't think that he wasn't worthy of the hire. I mean, it goes to the backbone of, what US soccer is. It really kind of likes its former players. And, Berhalter had, grinded his way into that discussion of whether or not he was competent enough to lead a national team. But the idea that, if you do this for me, we'll make sure you're taken care of on the back end. I can probably tell you that if you're a head coach of a national team, that position is higher than a lot of, that position has more respect in the global game than a lot of domestic leagues around the world. And the quid pro quo of, it's cool if you do this for me, we'll make sure that you have a cushy job in Chicago when you're done. Yeah, it doesn't work that way. Because generally speaking, if you do a pretty solid job, and if you're a relatively young coach that's stepping into the international game, and you have a pretty solid run as an international coach, and which Greg Berhalter did. I think he won a couple nations league and had a pretty solid showing with a young U.S. men's national team. Chances are pretty good that if he actually walked away after the end of the first cycle, he probably would have got another shot in Europe. Chances were pretty good. Although he came back, and then, of course, it didn't work out, and what was left was probably a Major League Soccer job, which he took. But the reality of it is that, these type of backroom deals generally come with a quid pro quo. And I probably would guarantee you that most coaches would walk away with it. That's not what they signed up for. They signed up to have the autonomy to do what they feel is in their best interest of that national team. They want to put a stamp on their own national team. And I always go back to Berhalter's first cycle. After the debacle, and after the debacle of 2017, and by the way, U.S. Soccer played it terribly, played it unbelievably terribly. By firing Jurgen Klinsmann when they fired him. And the funny thing is like immediately after that happened, within a few weeks, Clint Dempsey came back into the national team fold. And it would have been interesting to see exactly how that would have played out under Jurgen Klinsmann. Just the familiarity of the program that was already in place. One wonders if the team would actually rebounded and qualified. But, obviously Bruce Arena came in, and it is what it is. Would Jurgen been able to figure it out? Yeah, I think he probably would have. I think you would have, Greg. The funny thing about it is, like, U.S. Soccer panicked. And it was kind of funny that they did, considering that, a year prior, Jurgen led the team to a semifinal in the Copa America. You know what I mean? The team was a little old, understood. But that being said, everybody understood exactly what their place in the national team was. Everybody understood their role. They had good leadership, and introduced into that young qualifying cycle was Christian Pulisic. And Clint Dempsey came back, as we saw. And I like a very big part of me feels like if Jurgen was able to finish out that qualifying, chances were pretty good that we would have qualified for 2018. But as it was, it wasn't. It didn't work out that way. And Bruce Arena, didn't do enough as the national team head coach. And as such, it is what it is. And following that debacle, Dave Sarachan took over. He was just a placeholder. And then obviously Greg Berhalter steps in 2018 at the beginning of the cycle. And the funny issue, the funny thing about this is that all those players that failed to qualify, all those U.S. greats were thrown to essentially thrown to the scrap pile. And with the exception of a few young players that were already overseas, i.e. Christian Pulisic, who was at Dortmund, who was just starting to get into the first team with Dortmund. And I think Wes was in Schalke. I think he was still in the U19s. But that being said, it's like what was left was a domestic pool. And that was actually played out. Now, over the course of the 4 years, he brought in the Jedis and he brought in the Yunus Musas of the world. And, a lot of those guys ended up getting their first caps. And by the time 2022 rolled around, he had his team. But that being said, a lot of the depth on that team, we didn't necessarily have the best depth in the world. And of course, Major League Soccer played a big role in it. But it wasn't for nefarious reasons. It was because our depth has never really been the greatest. Like, go back to any cycle and our depth has never really been the greatest. And if it wasn't for Major League Soccer, if it wasn't for actually having the domestic side of the pool, we probably would have been hooped in a lot of those World Cups. A lot of those guys were brought onto World Cup rosters because either A, they fit, or B, they were in form. And it was just really good timing. Let's see. Players like Julian Green, Conrad De La Fuente, Sebastian Soto, Matthew Hopper, players that fell into the abyss and need to be studied. That what's funny though is that was the other thing, right? The need of dual nationals, and they, it was right though, right? It was a necessity because, again, when you start looking at some of the depth chart, especially in those days, there were certain positions that were absolutely lacking. And when you can get a Fabian Johnson onto the team or a mixed Diskerud, it's going to, you're going to give yourself a little bit better of a chance. And of course, I know a lot of fans like dual nationals. I happen to be like touch and go with dual nationals. Me personally, I like to make sure that we've exhausted our pool before we bring them in. The last thing I want with dual nationals is for them to come into the fold and then not be used. Like Julian Green is a perfect example of a dual national that came in for a very short time and was never seen again. Same thing with all the names that you mentioned right there. And it's not necessarily a good thing, right? Because for every John Brooks or not Christian Pulisic, but Jermaine Jones that actually do have an impact, for a few years, there's others that come in and, maybe are around for a year, but then ultimately fall into the abyss and potentially take away, a depth chart spot to somebody that's probably earned it. And so that's kind of where I fall in it. But the interesting thing is that Mauricio Pochettino comes in with 18 months with no ties to the federation, no ties to Major League Soccer, and he's got 18 months to figure it out. 18 months to figure it out. And so there really isn't a lot of time. And I'm sure he knew about Christian and Wes and Chris Richards and some of these other guys because over in Europe, he probably knows. And being in England, being in France, I'm sure he's ran across a few of them. So from that standpoint, I'm sure he was aware of the bigger names that are in the pool. But, when you're putting together a World Cup roster, you actually have to start from the ground and you have to work your way up until you get to a World Cup. And what was interesting about it was watching some of these guys lose their fucking minds, when, Sebastian Berhalter gets called in, or when Tristan Blackman comes in, or Brian White. And it's like, you do realize this happens every single cycle. Like without like clockwork, at the beginning of every single cycle, the player pool resets, aging players leave. You'll have some hangovers that are going to be reevaluated, but for the most part, you're looking for that next wave of player that comes in, right? And of course, your coach has a very specific, distinct style in which he wants to play. It seems like the truth just kind of hits you right in the face, like when you see it. It's like, okay, and I knew it right from the beginning too, and it's like, this isn't like some backroom cabal. It's like, he has a player profile, and so he's like his first after like that first October window, and then he got into the Nations League, and then he had his first Camp Cupcake, and it was his first opportunity to really kind of see the domestic pool, and from it he was able to literally get like 4 or 5 guys that really just, that he really just trusted because of the way that they showed up, the way that they trained, the way that they prepared themselves. And from that, you want to integrate them into the first team. You want to see exactly how that looks like, right? And so you'll have some guys come in, you'll have some guys drop off. And that was 2025. But, for the most part, we all know who's going to be at the World Cup. There's not going to be any surprises. I think we know for a fact who's going to be there. But there's also going to be 4 or 5 guys, that have routinely been called in, and they continue to maintain that high level that Pochettino expects. He likes him. Okay. I'm sure there's players on England that, most fans, probably, don't like, or wondering why they're there. But that being said, they fit and match exactly what the coach is looking for. Versus a dude in Europe who may not be at that level, or maybe there was a bad first impression. I don't know. But that being said, it's when you look at Pochettino and you look at the fact that there is no ties to U.S. soccer, he's not going to sit there and put up with that shit. He's not going to put up with it. Like, he is here to do a job. And 2 days after the World Cup, we're going to find out where he's going next. It's simple. It's really fucking simple. And, that is the harsh reality of where we're at, because, some might say that we got fleeced. Yeah, probably. But that is the name of the game when you're dealing with coaches who are at that level. When you're at the domestic level, it's a little bit different, because they're not being paid nearly as much as a dude like Pochettino's played, and there is some sort of you got to play by the rules, if you will, with U.S. soccer. So you're not going to put them in a position where they look bad. Pochettino just doesn't care. He doesn't live here. He still lives in London. He shows up to the United States like a week before a international window is set to open. He gets him and his staff prepared. Players come in, they do their thing. As soon as the window closes, him and his coaching staff will have their wrap up, going over everything that happened over the window, and then he heads back to London. That's just the reality of it. He's not like there is no like ambiguity involved at all. It is really cut and dry. You know, and it's interesting too because the main donors of U.S. soccer are the ones that are funding them. That's what I kind of find interesting is the fact that these dudes outside of being donors, there's no ties to Major League Soccer with these guys either. That's the interesting part. They're not a part of any ownership group as far as I know. That's the interesting thing. There is no backdoor shenanigans going down. But that being said, it is kind of interesting though, because the funny thing about a guy like Jurgen Klinsmann was that he was a U.S. soccer employee uh, railing against Major League Soccer. It was fun. It was funny. It was funny to listen to him talk about it. Where it's like, on the one hand, you have to respect it because it is your domestic side of the pool, but at the end of the day, he was more than willing to tell some of these young players that in order for you to be competing at a high level where your impact on the national team will actually matter, you have to be doing it overseas. And U.S. Soccer hated it, hated it, hated it. Big moves incoming to replace Crocker and Potts, just more incompetent BS. The interesting thing about that, Greg, is that it wouldn't surprise me if you blame Brian McBride during his tenure. He actually was unceremoniously fired. That was crazy. The way that they did McBrizzle. But I'm curious to know why you blame McBride. I'd be curious to know that. The interesting thing about the upcoming sporting director position is that I feel like Iguchi Onyewu is probably going to get that job because he's already been doing the heavy lifting of that job already for a very long time, because Matt Crocker also lived in London. He was permanently based in London and only came to the United States when necessary. Like, he wasn't here boots on the ground. He was here for the bag because the U.S. paid him, and because he did have that sporting director tie in the UK where he had done the job before, but it's the U.S. system is incredibly convoluted. It's incredibly convoluted. There's a lot of bureaucracy. There's a lot of red tape. And there's a lot of people that are comfortable doing the things that they've been doing for decades. And Matt Crocker probably wanted to do a lot of things that a lot of people just didn't want to do. And I think it reached a point where he realized that no matter how much that he tried to push, people were still going to continue to do what they were going to do. There was no loyalty to the brand. There was no loyalty to U.S. Soccer, right? U.S. Soccer is just an organizing body. They are the guys that set the rules, but inside the rules, you're still able to operate any which way you please, as long as you abide by the rules of U.S. Soccer. And there is no rules against, like, especially in the youth ranks, there is no rules against pay for play. There's no rules, right? I mean, shit, there are Major League Soccer teams that charge for their academies too. Let's see. Do you trust a former U.S. men's national player to over an outside candidate? Yeah, I do, to an extent, because we just saw an outside candidate not being able to do his job properly, whether it is meddling from above him or different entities within U.S. soccer that just weren't going to play ball. And I think it came to a point where, he just said, listen, I want to continue on the international level, but the United States is dug in with the way that they've been doing things forever. And there has to be a fundamental change at the top. And I would probably assume that those people at the top are comfortable with the status quo, and they're not going to move mountains to change. So he took the bag and went to Saudi Arabia. A guy like Oguchi Onyewu, who came in through the youth ranks himself, he was a part of that Project 2010. Who came through the U.S. development system, who understands the U.S. development system, who obviously was a member of the U.S. men's national team. And now that he has been on the administrative side now for years, and he's been essentially doing the job for a few years now, I think, for me at least, I think he's probably ready to do it. Tab Ramos, in my opinion, is so smart from a soccer mind. He needs to be up there somewhere. I wouldn't have a problem with Tab either. I guess the question is, does Tab want to do it? Right? We're going to know exactly which direction the wind is blowing based on the hire of this sporting director. We will find out. I think Gooch is pretty smart. I also think Tab is pretty smart as well, too. You wonder if Tab wants to come in and, does Tab want to, run the youth programs? I wouldn't mind him being in charge of the youth programs. That would be a smart decision. But yeah, I do, because the problem with an outside candidate is they don't understand that bureaucracy and those political climates within inside U.S. soccer. They don't understand it. And so there's going to be a lot of people that are going to shut out that person. And I'm sure Matt Crocker dealt with that as well, too. Like, for me, Matt Crocker was just the dude that was hiring and firing coaches. I think that was ultimately his job. And maybe trying to bring in a dual national or two, or whatever the case may be. I think over the time, his powers kind of depreciate a little bit, because those that are above him, guys like JT Batson, Greg Berhalter's brother, Cindy Parlow Cohn, those guys universally have that unilateral power to override anything that he wants to do, i.e. bringing Greg Berhalter back for that second time, which was something that Matt Crocker didn't want to do. He was kind of forced to do it. Yeah, but that's the thing. And that is going to be that's going to be an interesting development too, because if Oguchi Onyewu is going to be tabbed as that next sporting director, I would probably assume that the next coach is probably going to be coming from the United States. I would probably assume that that's going to be his first hire, because there's going to be a lot of work on the senior national team for the 2030 cycle, because there's already some guys that are going to age out, and there's going to be a new group of young kids coming in through Major League Soccer that are going to be playing a huge role in the 2030 cycle. That probably by 2030 are going to be playing in Europe. That would be my guess. But it's interesting, man. It's interesting. Like, I find the conversation insulting, to be honest with you, because that's the thing. It's like, I would probably assume Greg is a smart guy. He sounds like he's a smart guy. And that's the thing. It's like, I don't want to insult the people that tune into my show. U.S. soccer fans are by and large smart soccer fans, right? Like, It doesn't take a PhD to understand that, the idea that that Major League Soccer doesn't have that type of pull. It really doesn't. The interesting thing is, like, does it have pull with U.S. Soccer to make sure that their best interests are protected? Sure. Because they're the ones that fund the money, right? The money goes up. Like, think of U.S. Soccer as a crime organization, right? The Bonanno family, or the Gambinos, the Colombos. Think of them like that, right? Because everybody kicks up, right? Major League Soccer funds, by and large, U.S. Soccer. And because of it, Don Garber has a seat on the board. And so when you see some of these rules that serve in the best interest of Major League Soccer, that's one thing. But that being said, U.S. Soccer in principle is supposed to be an autonomous governing body, and the national team is separate from U.S. Soccer. And the coach of that team has the unilateral decision to decide exactly who he's going to take to a World Cup. And it's always been that way. And it always will. And the day that it doesn't, we're going to see a coach just up and quit. 100% you're going to see a coach up and quit. And what's going to be interesting is those interviews that are coming straight out the end of it, right? So far, Jesse Marsch was the only dude to go public with what happened. I would probably assume that we would have already heard from Jurgen, from Bob, from Bruce, if there was pressure from, Major League Soccer or U.S. Soccer to carry certain players, or a specific amount of players, right? That's my biggest issue with the whole conversation, is like, what's the number? Is it 4? Is it 6? Is it 10? What's the number? What's the universal number everybody agrees with? Right. I haven't heard that yet, because it doesn't exist. We would have already heard that come out in an interview. But Jesse Marsch was the only dude, who was the first one to illuminate everything, because he got burned. He had a handshake deal in place. And in the 11th hour, Matt Crocker called him back and said, listen, the powers that be want Greg. They had that 10-month search only to come back to Greg. And a lot of it had to do with his brother and Cindy Parlow-Cohn, who felt like he was being done wrong by his best friends. Okay. But he was the one, Jesse Marsch was the one that was not afraid to go public to show the incompetence of U.S. Soccer. But I would almost certainly expect that if something like that were to happen, where it's like, all right, dude, you got to carry 6 of these players. We don't care who the players are, but you got to carry 6. We would have heard that by now. But, those 3 coaches go on, that rant table, and, they were candid, and I believe them. They have no reason to lie. None of them are employed. There's no need to protect anyone. And all those that were in power at the time are no longer there. They're no longer in power anymore. Who are you there to protect? No, it's like there's no, they were unceremoniously dumped. If anything, they would be more willing to pile dirt on. But no. Yeah, they were called in, and they had conversations about players. That happens on a daily basis, because coaches call all the time. to talk about their players, whether or not they feel like they should get a look at an upcoming camp. Okay, that happens all the time. But ultimately, like, the decision to bring a player to the World Cup is always down to the coach and his staff. Always down. And it's the same with Mauricio Pochettino. And again, he's got no ties. He's got no ties to U.S. soccer. So why would he play ball? Why would he play ball? Because he's being paid $6.5 million? They're not paying him. Ken Griffin's playing him. Ken Griffin is paying Mauricio Pochettino. And oh, by the way, Pochettino's going back to England after the World Cup anyways, right? So where's the quid pro quo? Where is the, if you do this for me, we'll do this for you type of scenario, right? He's not going to stay and coach Messi in Miami. He's not doing that. Well, Greg stayed and coached Chicago. It's like, yeah, because he stupidly came back. He should have said thank you, but no. Like, my time, my cycle, I had my cycle. And I'm going to ride off into the sunset, and I'll see if I can end up back in Europe. That should have been his play. Coming back to the national team hurt himself more than it helped. Because at that stage, I think the players may or may not have lost some respect for him. And I think that kind of manifested itself a little bit at Copa America. And that result really kind of hurt Greg in the long run. Had he just walked away after the 2022 Cup, there was a good chance that Greg possibly could have found himself in Europe somewhere. Jurgen sure as fuck didn't land in Major League Soccer. Jurgen spent his entire time railing against Major League Soccer and was mad at Clint and Michael and Josie for coming back, for taking the money. He didn't blame them for taking the money, but that being said, it's like, he was preparing for, World Cup 2014, and some of his biggest players decided to come back to Major League Soccer at a time where the league was still expanding, and the talent level wasn't as what it was today. I mean, Major League Soccer today is far and away better than it was 12 years ago. And it'll probably be better 10 years from now. But it's kind of funny. Yeah, no, he did. Jurgen went on an adventure. He went to, he was at, where did he go after? Because I know he went back to Germany for a spell. Yeah, let's go. Let's see it real quick. Yeah, he went to Hertha. I don't think he lasted a year at Hertha, and then he was in. He took over for South Korea, and then that didn't work out either. Where was Jurgen's cushy MLS job? No, I don't buy it. I don't buy it at all. But it's interesting too, because this is the first time that this has happened in USMNT history, where an international coach comes and their salary is funded privately outside of the scope of U.S. soccer. That's never happened before. And because of it, he has the ability to essentially do whatever he wants. Like, he is not bound by any, by any one scope of the rules of U.S. soccer. And the funny thing about Mauricio is he's not going to get fired either. That's the crazy thing. Because there's no chance he's going to get fired. Who are they going to bring back? Bruce for a third time? No. Like in a pinch, maybe they might, they might try to find somebody in a pinch, maybe, but no, it's like they're not going to fire him. Because if they fire him, they put themselves in jeopardy with their donors. They're not going to bite the hand that feeds them. That's certainly not going to happen. And so from that standpoint, you have to understand that that Mauricio, has full autonomy of the senior national team. And that is something, that is power that is, for the first time ever, I would probably assume that a coach does have, superseding powers that supersede the federation. There is a clear separation between coach and federation, which is something that's never happened. Usually, because if you're an employee of the federation, there is a certain line that you can't cross, and the federation will reel you back in if they feel like maybe you're stepping out. Like, there is a company line that you have to keep. And Mauricio is being gracious. Like, he's not a dick. He's not gonna say things that are going to embarrass him, embarrass the Fed. But that being said, it's like he's also not gonna eat their shit either. And I think that's an important distinction. So when you see somebody, wondering why, Christian Roldan is continuing to be called in, understand that there's certain things about Christian Roldan's making that he likes. There's certain players that he likes, and there's going to be certain players that he doesn't like for a myriad of reasons, and it has nothing to do with overreaching control. It doesn't exist. It certainly doesn't exist now. It might in the future. We'll see. But I would probably assume that whoever the next coach is, that he would probably be in the exact same situation as well, too, where it's like, if there is meddling from above and they are telling him how to fill out a roster, or if they're not making certain players available, so he would only be forced to deal with these players, I would probably assume that coach quits. Because there's a certain line that the Fed can't cross. And I don't think the Fed would cross it too, because that also ends up fucking with their bottom line. It ends up fucking with their sponsorship money, their TV money. And the last thing that they want to do is do anything that would impede the gravy train coming in. That's the way that I feel about it. And I feel like anybody that has an agenda that, and mind you, by the way, I don't get paid by the federation. I don't get paid by Major League Soccer. I get paid by my employer that I work for, but it's in a completely different industry. I'm just a soccer fan, and I happen to like U.S. soccer because I'm an American. Dude, I got the badge tattooed on my arm. I absolutely love American soccer. But what I've seen over the last 4 or 5 years has gotten to a point where it's ridiculous. And I think the interesting thing about it is I understand it too, because there's an emotional aspect of it. Because there's been a lot of instability in the last 4 years. That has made a lot of U.S. men's national team fans uneasy. I understand that too. Because where we left off in 2022, we should have taken the next steps, and I would probably assume that most people think that we've taken 3 steps back from 2022. And there's, a lot of moving parts, and it seems like maybe the national team is moving in like 4 different directions, and it's like the players are the ones that are the ones that being asked about it, and of course they're not going to talk. They're not going to talk publicly about it. But I understand the emotional aspect of it because we haven't seen this before. The only time that compares is when we didn't qualify in 2017 and the turmoil after that. But within 2 years, we had a head coach, and we were on our way to qualifying for 2022, and things worked out. But then we have the Gio Reyna debacle, and then the fallout from that, and that led into 2024, and unfortunately, you have that type of instability where you have to switch a coach mid-cycle. It's going to take time for that coach to implement his ideas. So it's not the most ideal situation that we're currently in. And so from an emotional standpoint, I understand you're looking for somebody to blame. That's the thing. It's like in any good story, there's always a villain. In any good story, there's always a villain. There's somebody that you can point to. And it very well could just be the villain is incompetence. Like, if you want to have a conversation about, incompetence inside the Federation, we can have that. Because me personally, I feel like that is kind of like the overriding problem. And I think it absolutely shows. I really do. And we just saw it recently when, Matt Crocker left with 100 days until, a home World Cup. That's not normal. That's not normal. And what that shows is embarrassment, and it also shows incompetence, and it shows it at the highest level. The face of your executive branch quits right before a World Cup. That it doesn't get any more embarrassing than that. And for me, that's kind of where I point. That's where I kind of point. If I'm looking for a villain, that's kind of what I'm pointing at. But to point the finger and come to the wrong conclusion, that's Keystone Cop shit right there. Seriously. That's Keystone Cop shit right there. Because that's not the case. It's not the case. For a number of reasons, it's not the case. Mainly because, our coach has autonomy to do whatever the fuck he wants. And he can't get fired for it for a number of reasons that we've already been over. Because those that are paying Mauricio Pochettino are the ones that, privately funded their new headquarters in Atlanta, are the ones that are opening doors for sponsorship to the Federation. You don't fuck with your money. You don't fuck with your money. And if it is true, which it's not, but let's just for the sake of conversation say it is true, it would leak out. Somebody would leak it. In today's day and age, where everyone has a camera in their hand and everybody has a Twitter feed or a TikTok feed, that shit would come out. 100% it would come out. Some staffer would inadvertently leak it, or somebody in Mauricio Pochettino's circle, not his camp, but his circle. Somebody that may or may not could be tied to him would leak it. 100%. Or, former coaches would just say it. So there you go. So there you go. That's the thing that I think soccer fans, US soccer fans, need to understand, is that the internet, social media, has become a hub of rage bait. People that have opinions that probably shouldn't have them. But this is where we are now in 2026. It's not going away anytime soon. As a matter of fact, it's enhancing with AI and some of these other things. That's also my fear as well, too. Because somebody can just make some shit up and post it like it's real. Greg 1987 says, prime example, then the Federation would have made Jurgen take Donovan. And yeah. That's exactly right. And that's something that I always come back to. And I've said it a few times already, that if there really was a quota, somebody from Major League Soccer, either Don Garber or at the time it was Sunil Gulati, would have stepped in and put Landon Donovan back on the roster for 2014. Because Landon Donovan was worth millions of dollars in sponsorship money tied to him being at the World Cup in 2014. He was. Don't let anybody fool you that he wasn't, because he was. Landon Donovan, was the one, Landon Donovan not only was being paid by Nike, but it was through Nike that not only were they sponsoring their jersey, not only were they, put their swoosh on their kits, but you go to any USMNT friendly and you would see the Nike swoosh everywhere. They were corporate sponsors. Coca-Cola, banking. It's like, dude, he was worth millions of dollars in sponsorship revenue. And if that was the case, if there was any type of involvement, they would have stepped in and put him on the 2014 squad. But yet he was left off. Yeah. So, yeah. There is. Yeah. That's a prime example of the fact that it kind of runs counter on top of the Pochettino. The separation that Pochettino has from the Fed. By the way, that decision ultimately cost Jurgen Klinsmann his job. The Feds used the first two losses in the qualifying cycle as an excuse, but he was constantly making any enemies within U.S. soccer, because he was constantly telling every young player that was coming through to leave Major League Soccer. And it also, it was also when some of his national team players after the fact, after Clint came over, that were thinking of taking the bag, he would step in and tell them to stay, to grind it out. It would be worth it. And U.S. Soccer had enough, so they fired him. But yeah, the inexcusable was leaving Donovan off. He wasn't able to come back from that one. But I digress. Yep, Unk is back. Callum Ritchie, what's up, bud? Unk is back. You can call me Unk. I'm okay with it, man. I'm 40, almost 45 now. I think I'm in Unk territory. It's true. I'm in Unk territory. All right, guys, that's going to do it for me. It's been fun. I got shit to do. So, fuck, man, I got to work tomorrow. Back to the grind. You guys be good, man. Do me a favor and please hit that like and subscribe button, and also hit the notification bell. And so you don't so you don't miss out on any upcoming Stateside Footy content, man. I can't even speak. Yeah, just like and subscribe. That's all you got to do, man. You enjoy your evening too, Greg. Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like I am that dude that just shoots everything right down the middle. Like there is like I wish I can be a rage baiter. Like I wish I can say some shit that I knew was false. Maybe my Twitter account would go up to like 5,000 or whatever the case may be. I just don't have it in me to fuck with people on that level. I personally feel like it's lying. In a big way, it's deceiving. I can't do it. I can't do it to people, man. But I certainly will tell the truth. And I certainly will. I will certainly lay it out. And I'll let you come to the conclusion that what you hear is 99% bullshit. Everything that you hear on the internet is 99% bullshit. And all it takes is just a simple look on Google, and you'll find out that, yeah, it's bullshit. And that most of it is just emotion. Because there is an uneasiness going into the World Cup, and I don't think we've ever experienced it. Not on this level. Not on this level. Maybe like the closest was 2002, because we were coming off a pretty embarrassing 1998, where we finished dead last in the tournament. And so there was a little bit of uneasiness going into it, but that was quickly thrown to the wayside. Even after 2006, going into 2010, there wasn't that level of uneasiness as there is now. So I understand it, but to throw something out there without any shred of evidence, I feel is misleading. So I'm here to call it right down the middle. And if it smells like bullshit, then it is bullshit. That's the reality, right? If it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, it sure as fucking a cow. Let's see. The Iranian situation has made it more than just soccer. Trump needs to stay out of our World Cup. Yeah, I get it. I want Iran to compete, by the way. I really do. That's the thing. It's like I'd rather stick to soccer. I got my views on politics, but I'm going to leave them out. I'm going to leave them out of it. So, all right, guys. You guys take it easy. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I hope you guys have a great start to your work week. And I will see you guys back on Tuesday for USMNT Yanks Abroad as we recap the weekend that was for our USMNT pool players abroad. So take care. Good night.
Rusted goalposts under fade.